Hello, this is Pete Bringe, Chief Customer Officer for Ricoh North America. I want to thank you for joining today's webinar, Teamwork on the New World of Work. As we all know, the pandemic caused a lot of changes for all of us. It immediately put focus on the health of our customers, our employees, our fans, our students. It was critical that we adapted. We added technology to help us communicate. We allowed people to change where they work. And we figured out how to stay connected to our customers. And a lot of that technology was very helpful. However, as the pandemic persisted, some challenges arose. That lack of social interaction has started to put strain on companies' culture, their ability to innovate, and in some cases, their ability to execute. It became critical that organizations got their arms around their employees as a means in order to them help better communicate in an uncertain time. A lot of different tactics and approaches were taken, many of which have been successful. I'm very happy to have today a very esteemed panel of individuals coming from a cross-section of organizations and some of our best partners, organizations that we're proud to be considered a partner of because of their culture, their commitment to excellence, and their ability to adapt. Today, we're going to focus on a couple key topics. How do you create certainty in an uncertain world, which evolves around clarity? How do you enforce or enhance collaboration so that individual cultures can maintain and people can thrive in the new organization? And then how technology is playing a role in doing that, either good or bad, from the standpoint of the use of that technology. I'd like at this point in time to introduce our panelists. We have Catherine Carlson, the Senior Vice President of Revenue and Strategy for the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. You get to say that, Catherine, for at least 10 more years, okay? And then it gets timed out. So welcome.
Thank you.
We have Drew Martin, Executive Senior Associate Athletic Director for External Affairs at the University of Texas. Drew, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we have Heather Masterson, Vice President of Shared Resources for the 13-time NASCAR Cup Series champions, and Hendricks Motorsports, a phenomenal organization. And I recommend anyone that doesn't know the history of Hendricks, please take the time to learn it. It's a case study of American success. And I'm very proud of that organization. And finally, I'd like to welcome Donna Venable, Executive Vice President, Human Resources and Shared Services for Ricoh North America. Donna and I have known each other for well over 2 decades. So Donna, welcome.
Thank you, Pete.
So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining today, and I look forward to the dialogue. I'd like to start with the first question, topic. How do you create clarity in a level of uncertainty? When you think about what's happened in all of your organizations today and the delays that could occur at a moment's notice, and people had to respond and react, and how the future of your organization was going to be impacted by the pandemic. How did you approach engaging with the broader constituents in the organization, internally and externally, in order to help them understand what you can communicate about the future? So Drew, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you.
Sure, it's certainly, was an abrupt situation in mid-March when I believe we were at the Big 12 Conference basketball tournament in Kansas City when suddenly that tournament was halted. I believe we were even on the court warming up for a game, and the tournament was called off, and we all headed to the airport and came home and came back to our campus here in Austin. And got together as a leadership team, and basically the university had sent everyone home and began to issue that students were to go on spring break and plan to extend that spring break, which ultimately wound up being the extension to the rest of the semester. It all happened so very quickly. It's even hard at this point to remember back all of the nitty-gritty details, but our executive leadership team in athletics, led by our athletics director, Chris Del Conte, made a commitment then that we were to meet on a daily basis. And I will give our IT staff a lot of credit that when we all grabbed our laptops and workstations and headed home, we were already equipped with an emergency plan like this that none of us were even aware existed on our computers, with cameras built into laptops and sharing software and video conferencing software that none of us really used on a daily basis. So we were prepared for that. And we began to meet every day at 2 p.m. Central Time with our executive leadership team, inviting in first our medical staff just to level set every day on what is this? Where are we with this pandemic? What are the numbers showing us, both from a very micro level on campus all the way to a macro level, in the United States and beyond, as to where are we headed. So the education was really key to that entire process of just making sure our executive level leadership was organized and communicating with each other, and that we were communicating first and foremost initially with our coaches and our student athletes. This is a very unique situation where you have 18 to 21-year-olds that are on college campuses away from home and are very used to a regimented structure of practices and meal times and study times and tutor sessions and classes and events and competitions. And all of that in the blink of an eye was just halted. So there was a lot of uncertainty amongst all of us, but particularly with our most precious resource, which is our student athlete, that we had to make sure that we were establishing open lines of communication with those young people through our coaches, and setting up Zoom calls and video conference meetings just to answer questions.
Thank you. Yeah, you used a term when you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago, authentic, which I thought was very appropriate for the circumstances today. And, when you said authentic, what was your definition of it?
For me, the authenticity in the situation is to own up to that. So many times, just natural habits, and especially sometimes in leadership, we feel so much pressure to have the answers. And this is just a situation that this world, in modern times hasn't faced. And so there really aren't answers. And so to be able to authentically come to the table, I go back to the adage of nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that was really step one of, we're in this with you authentically. Here's what's going on in my life. Here's what's happening, in our world, and to open up and share that and really be vulnerable in that space and authentic with our messaging and our care for the people first. We will get to the answers of what happens financially. What does this mean for television contracts? What does this mean for sponsorships? What does this mean for refunds on tickets that had been purchased? We were right in the middle of and actually getting ready to close out on season ticket renewals for football, which is the economic enterprise behind, a collegiate athletics program, particularly, in our area. And so there were a lot of questions about that. But first and foremost, are you okay?
Yep, great. Thank you. Heather, you had some interesting comments about, some of the challenges that you folks were, making sure you guarded against inside of Hendrix. Talked a little bit about, making sure employees understand the impact to the business, but also the outline for the future. Do you want to share a little bit on that?
So, we're in a little bit of a different situation than I think what a lot of other people are, in that we actually returned back to the offices in July. And one of the things that we had to mitigate with this, as it relates to our employee base and our partners and things along those lines, were, what does this mean when we get back to the track? How do we get back to the track? How do we manage the communications? How do we continue to work in this hybrid solution that we had coming back at first, where we had engineers and some staff who could work from home, but we definitely had fabricators and mechanics and things like that couldn't. So how do you marry the communications between those groups and really work to make sure that we're still functioning on all cylinders, to make sure that we were getting the best product that we could to the race? One of the things that we really had to maintain and actually increase a little bit was our agility within the system, and being able to respond quickly, because, kind of similar to what Drew said, this hit us quick and it hit us hard. It wasn't necessarily anything that anybody could plan for or necessarily have a contingency in place. You could have different pieces of it being in place, whether it be your IT systems or emergency responses and communications and things along those lines. But I don't think anybody had a true idea of how long this was going to extend, which means our agility had to change. And sometimes it was changing from week to week to week.
Yes.
And we may have been addressing and or shifting what our communication plan was. And again, kind of similar to what Drew had done, we had a cadence in place from a leadership perspective that we had to reach out to employees, not necessarily in the means of doing business, but just reaching out to them and saying, how are you doing? How is the family? Is there anything you need? Is there anything I can get to you? What can the company do differently? Are we communicating enough? Are we communicating too much? And, you know, I think communications is that piece that everybody struggles with. And what we had to do in this time was actually improve what we were doing from a communication standpoint. Because when you get thrown into that situation where you don't have that one, you know, face-to-face meeting with everybody and you're having to do everything virtually, it truly is a different means of communication that you have with people. And so, you know, our biggest takeaway from it was definitely the agility of our responses and information and communication, not only to our employees, but back to our partners on a regular basis as to where we stood and what we were doing.
Thank you. You also made a reference when we talked about a term you heard, and I know we were trying to figure it out right before we got on air, but it was the dark web of employee, was it rumors?
Yes, it was the employee dark web of rumors is what it is. And you know, as much as I hate to say this, what information you don't share with your employees, they're going to make up their own.
Yes.
And that's what we're referring to when we say the dark web of employee relations and employee rumors and conversations, because you know, what they hear is what they hear on the news, what they hear other people talking. And as we know, this became a very politicized topic. You know, you had people who were listening to one side or the other, and they weren't necessarily listening to the medical staff or things that were being said to them. And we had some pretty deep rumors that we had to dispel and work with, and some very interesting conspiracy theories that we had to work through and dispel as well.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Catherine, I know the Eagles got very creative during this time with very few fans in the stadium, and you had to try to replicate the experience, not just for the players, but the fans as well as your sponsors. Can you share a little bit of some of the approaches you took?
Well, you've all brought up really important points, and I think COVID tested our leadership skills to the max. I mean, it tested our ability to simultaneously, you know, respond to real world events, managing a team remotely, and then, you know, working with a broad range of clients that were in industries that may or may not have been impacted by COVID. So it was just really interesting for us. And as we looked at the upcoming season and working out what are some of our creative ways that we can engage our fans and work with our clients, there were sort of three key mantras that I encouraged my staff to live by. And they were ones that have already been mentioned: communication, transparency, and flexibility. And I think those three really set us up for success, because, you know, we were dealing with real-time changes. And sometimes you want to over communicate to your clients and give them the insight on what's about to be announced. But quite often throughout this time of uncertainty, we were actually finding it out through breaking news, or through a Twitter post. And so that ability to be proactive in our communications was somewhat limited. And so I think, you know, we were able to try and get ahead of it. And, you know, I think I always say the only thing you can prepare for is preparation itself, except during a worldwide pandemic, because things were happening so quickly, real time. So I think with, you know, as we looked at our partnerships, we had to take a very flexible approach. And I think, you know, I spent 10 years working at Walt Disney World, and it was always it's always about the customer experience. How do you create strong relationships? And I think going through this together, we were over communicating. We were meeting with our clients on a bi-weekly basis. We were giving updates when we could, and we showed flexibility. So if it was a delayed payment on their invoices that would help them out and get through that, that was appreciated. And I think I'm hearing feedback from our clients right now that they really appreciate the Eagles' flexibility and willingness to work together as true partners to create, the best path forward during this pandemic. I think the one thing I've learned going through this past year is, the pandemic accelerated innovation and creativity.
Yes.
Because it was born out of necessity. And so this was something, and I think a lot of this innovation and creativity will live on long after we get through this. And I think that is actually one of the most positive things to come out of this. And probably the best example I have is we had 3 games where we had 5,500 fans. That was what we committed from a city perspective. It was the first time our venue had gone 100% cashless. So the Philly market is very unique, and it's a very cash heavy community. I was very surprised coming into this market, and we have a very high percentage of all transactions that are cash. And so changing that whole dynamic to going 100% cashless was a huge cultural change for our fans. But without the pandemic, that would have probably taken years to achieve, and we were able to achieve that in a season that was impacted, and contactless and cashless transactions became actually a necessity from a safety protocol standpoint.
Good, thank you. And I still have my stadium cut out. It's in my game room. So
That's great.
I'll keep it because I'll be at least that age for the next 10 years.
Well, that was an interesting, what you refer to is we weren't able to have fans for 7 out of our 10 games. And so to give our players the feeling because our Eagles fans are pretty passionate, and that's a polite way of saying it. So one of the things we actually did with Ricoh, and it got a ton of publicity, is we worked with Ricoh to create cardboard cutouts of the players to put in the stands. So our players felt like the Eagles fans were still there in spirit if they couldn't make it in person. And that was just an enormous hit. And we leveraged that to raise money for our foundation. And so anyone could upload their image and they'd be put on a cardboard cutout. And then that would raise money for our foundation. I think we raised over $250,000.
Congratulations. Thank you. Donna, you've had a lot to do since this pandemic. And we have quite a few employees that work remotely and were impacted by having to continue to support our customers on site, put themselves a little bit at risk. But also, our customers that were wondering how we were going to respond. You want to shed a little light on some of the key things we did to help our employees and the customers?
Sure. And you're right, Pete. We have customers on over 1,800 locations or sites across the US, and we operate in all 50 states. So when the pandemic hit, we needed to respond, and we needed to respond based on what any of those state specific requirements were evolving to be, and the customer specific requirements and what they were evolving to be. So for example, we had employees who were located in New York City at hospitals, working right downtown with the hospital staff to help make sure they could continue to do everything they needed to do. And our team was there and stayed with them. And they, as you've said, Pete, they were very much on the front lines. We had employees who were going from customer site to customer site, and we had to rethink that and think about what those interactions were going to look like and how we were going to manage the exposure that people would have to others. We needed to quickly communicate, and there were lots of great comments made by the team so far. For us, it was communicate, 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 because we wanted to make sure that we were dispelling any myths or rumors, and that we were trying to give information and facts to our employees and to empower them to be able to give those facts to our customers. So we wanted, wherever possible, to create that strong linkage and that strong connection with solid information and support to all the different types of unique customers that we have. And our employees responded incredibly well. I mean, it was absolutely amazing, the efforts and the creativity and innovation, as was talked about by Catherine. We absolutely saw that. Our employees understood our customers had needs and they wanted to meet those needs. And so they were extremely creative by different sites, different industries, different requirements, raising themselves and challenging themselves to meet all those extraordinary needs. From an executive perspective, we wanted to be transparent, we wanted to be accessible, and we wanted to communicate as much as we could, broadly and deeply. We did communication through weekly and sometimes daily videos. We used a COVID task force that was made up of representatives from all across the organization and across the geographies, and we shared information through that group as well. We created an intranet site, and we made sure we gave as much information as we could to our teams. We were honest when we didn't know. We were honest in what we were working through. We involved them as much as we could in making some of the decisions that we had to make. And we did that so that we could respond with the sense of urgency we felt our customers needed as well, because they were faced with exactly the same types of challenges we were. So it was challenging. 2/3 of our employees are out on customer locations at any given point in time. And then we had our core teams that had to go virtual overnight. So much like the challenges that we talked about earlier with Drew and team, we had to figure out, could we do it? Many folks didn't think we could, but we did very successfully. We were prepared and we leveraged technology. You can't underestimate the value of technology when it comes to a situation like this one and trying to keep people connected and able to communicate and work together. So it was a challenge, but I'm very proud of the work all of our teams did to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, a couple key notes. Thank you, Donna. I got out of all four, that authenticity, that transparency, but I also, inside of it, there was a lot of empathy and understanding what other, the individuals are going through, whether it's the employee, the fan, the student, the consumer. Donna, you brought up technology, and Heather, I'm going to direct this to you because you brought up an interesting comment when we spoke last about just the sheer number of communication channels that are out there today for people to interact with our leadership or other employees. And even though, while that is good, it also can be problematic in the sense that you have to check so many more communication sources. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So, the example that I used when we spoke previously is our general manager, who deals not only with as frontline employees, but he's also, front facing with General Motors. He's front facing with NASCAR. He's got so many of these different channels that are coming into him at any time. And no two companies truly communicate the same. So he may be fielding text messages, emails, instant messages, different forms of things coming at him from different venues of people. And one of the things that we realized too is that even when we go to the track, we have our teams that, even though we supply a company supported system, they may have found something that they prefer to use. And in using that, they're not necessarily communicating with the other teams that, we're supposed to be sharing information with and things along those lines. And so, from a pure security standpoint, that makes it difficult for us to be able to secure the data, the information, things along those lines. But what we really find is that people start shutting off certain modes of communication. And if that's not the next person's, the one that they've shut off could very easily be the preferred method of communication for another person. And so what I've really challenged my senior IT manager with this year in 2021 is, let's narrow the scope of our communications. Let's make sure that we are really kind of knowingly shrinking the number of systems that we're managing, that we're using, especially as it relates to communication tools. We've got a relationship with Microsoft from a data standpoint and some of the things that we do with Azure and things along those lines. But how do we consolidate it so that we say, We have safely and securely set up these systems for everybody to be able to communicate through. If you are not using these systems, then we can't guarantee the safety of the data and the materials. But if you are doing any type of corporate or company related communications, these are the ones you have to use. And it's going to be a shift. It truly is, because we carry our phones with us everywhere. And so text messages have very quickly become an easy mode of communication. Oh, I'll just text whoever it is that I need to get that. But we're not guaranteeing or able to trace that text actually really occurred. We don't know that transfer of communication, information, and knowledge has actually happened. And so we are trying to narrow the scope of what we do, how we do it, and then making sure that is appropriately disseminated out to the employees so that they understand the who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting challenge when you brought it up to me, because I didn't think about it. And then afterwards, I looked at just the sheer number of messages I didn't get back to, because I don't check that communication source.
Yep.
So I apologize to anyone I didn't get back to. Drew, you talked about, some of the communication approaches you took. Do you find certain modes of communication more effective than others?
For me, and Heather's going to hate this answer for sure, because my staff knows that if you really want my attention, you better text me, because the inbox is flooded with both important and just innocuous, just absolute extraneous emails on a daily basis, and it piles up very fast. And by the time that, you for example, you might get off a call like this after a certain period of time, and you've got 200 emails, and it's a communication string that's gone back and forth. And where do you fit into that whole communication process? And so for me, from a personal communication standpoint, if it needs my attention, you better text me. But, it's interesting when we talk about technology and communication, and I really appreciate what both Heather and Donna, mentioned, and that's the idea of, communication being so critical to this process, because what's not said is incredibly important, and in especially in the early days when people were really going and isolating. I mean, it was quarantine, but people were very locking their doors, and they're staying inside, and they're range the gamut from folks who live alone to folks that have large families. It just depends on your circumstances, and to keep that in mind, because a lot of period of quiet can lend to a lot of conversation in your head that may not be there, and particularly in the industry that we're in college sports. And we have an entire section in the papers and entire sections of news websites, channels dedicated on television to sports. And a lot of people out there with opinions and ideas and thoughts that have no basis in fact at that point suddenly run rampant and run wild. So I appreciate, you both, identifying that dark web, I believe it was called, of rumor and misinformation is great. But, from a technology standpoint, I'll go back, to what Catherine said, the ability for us to really leverage partnerships. We also had a partnership with Ricoh to do fan cutouts in the stands, and it was tremendously successful for us. But then to also leverage things like cashless, that's on our technology roadmap. But in a stadium of 100,000 people at Darrell K. Royal Texas Memorial Stadium here in Austin, that's a daunting task. As we're going to mobile ticketing, the idea of printing tickets, mailing tickets, delivering tickets, when we don't even know when the season's going to begin. We don't have a schedule. We don't know how many home dates we're going to have. The lead times on those things can sometimes be prohibitive. And so to be able to turnkey with various partnerships that we have in our ticketing and our concessions and transactional spaces. And one thing that was crucially important, we're not as cash dependent historically in the transaction ledgers that we see, as Catherine describes in Philadelphia. We have a significant part of the population that does not want to use or doesn't have access to a credit card or a debit card through their financial institution. And so even though we knew going cashless, it's safer, it's absolutely cleaner. we needed a solution for those that either don't want to or frankly can't get access to that type of payment methodology. And to partner with University Federal Credit Union here in Austin, which is a tremendous partner of the University of Texas Athletics program, to provide what they call cash to card kiosks. You put your money in, if you brought your kids to the game and normally you'd hand them each a $20 bill for the game, you can't do that this year. Put a 20 in and then another 20 in, and you're going to get 2 debit cards spat out and given to your kids, and they can use them at any of the concessions or merchandise locations on whatever they were going to spend that 20 on. It was a great benefit to us. But from a business standpoint, to go cashless, we knew it was on our roadmap, as was mobile ticketing, being able to really depend on our ticketing partners with Paciolan to convert from a hard ticket to a mobile ticket. We had a transition plan that we had already begun to roll out. Fans a year ago were able to do single game mobile tickets if they wanted. Fans this past season were given the option in renewals to receive a mobile season ticket as opposed to a hard season ticket. Well, now we were able to pull the trigger and go all mobile ticketing. It gave us the flexibility, and we now are in the education process with our fans, which is where it comes back into communication of this is the new way of doing business. We had a tremendous opportunity in our industry to be at 25%. We were able to work out a lot of the kinks and the hiccups and answer the questions and hear the concerns and deal with the real life situations in a sample set. And Catherine and Heather both know that the opportunity to work with a live event like that in a sample set, to be able to work out some of these kinks in your most important events. Mm-hmm. I hope we never do it again. It's an incredible opportunity that we've been given to work out the kinks and then to now approach in our case, the other 75% of our fan base.
Good. Thank you. Catherine, you mentioned a little bit about going cashless, and you talked a little bit about innovation and driving, and those innovations will persist past the pandemic. I completely agree with you. You also touched a little bit indirectly on social media and some of the ability to get access to information, communicate prior to perhaps false information or accurate information getting out prior to your ability to communicate to the key constituents. Is there anything that you folks did, you think, differently that enabled you to kind of stay on top of communication streams?
Yeah, I think when we found out we were able to have fans, I think we found out on Tuesday that we were able to have fans on Sunday. So that was a very short turnaround window for us. But obviously we had been working on contingency plans on the if what how scenarios. And so we really got ahead of it and working with a consultant to really put together a thorough operational plan for us to operate the game in a safe manner for our fans, I think was just incredible. I mean, the level of detail we went through in this planning, it was like an 80-page document. It laid out everything from messaging such as know before you go. So, okay, I'm brave enough. I'm going to get my ticket to the Eagles game. What do I need to know? And I think that was really critical because I think, we did surveys on our fans to say, okay, if tickets become available, would you be interested?
Yes.
But then when the tickets became available, the data wasn't as accurate as we had originally hoped. And so we had to go and over-communicate to our fans.
Okay.
So as they purchased the ticket, they had to be in a family pod of 2, 4, or 6.
Okay.
We limited our suites to only, 6 fans at a time. And, we only had one family group in an elevator at a time. So there was just a lot of procedures around that. And the communication around that was just so critical. And
Sure.
A lot of other teams mimicked that communication for what we planned. But I feel like we had a very solid plan in place, that included signage. I actually felt like 5,500 people at Lincoln Financial Field was a really nice customer experience. There was no traffic. There were no lines at the concession stands. You were after the game, you zoomed home and it wasn't an hour wait in traffic. It was interesting though, because after the first game, we did a survey prior to arrival and then after they experienced their first game. And when we first asked the question, what are your perceptions of the safety of your attending the game? And the numbers were sort of in that maybe 70 to 80% of fans thought, or their perception was that it would be safe.
Mm-hmm.
After the first game, we did the survey again, and over 93% of fans felt like they had a safe experience.
Wow.
So
very good.
It doesn't matter how much communication you do ahead of time and saying this is how it's safe it's going to be, until the fans experienced it, they couldn't firsthand. And then that became word of mouth, and their perception of the safety of attending the games was very, very high.
Good. Well, I'm just going to assume those 5,500 fans that got to go to the game are not going to like it back when there's 100,000.
I think they were spoiled for those 3 games.
Absolutely. Donna, when you and I talked a little bit about technology and communications, and a little bit of the same fatigue going on as individuals can't unwind, they're never disconnected. Do you want to share a little bit about what we're doing to try to help address that for our employees?
Sure. And that was an unintended consequence, I think, of our intention to be as connected as we could be and to collaborate and involve our employees. And as we had to go virtual, we leveraged our Teams capability and had, I would say almost nonstop video conferencing meetings or work sessions or collaboration sessions. And now that people were at home and didn't have that clean break point to leave for their commute or exit for, whatever, picking up the children, doing whatever they needed to do, none of that applied anymore. And so what we started to see was things that were blurring the lines between what would typically have been considered the work time and what would typically have been considered a transition to their own time. And so that started to concern us, because there were definitely different levels of stress that people were experiencing as they were balancing everything in their home lives that had changed with the pandemic. And so we said, we need to start thinking about how we can encourage people to disconnect and unwind and not be on 100% of the time the way they were falling into. We had folks who, let us know they would break for dinner and then come right back because it was right there in their home or in the next room from the kitchen. And so we said, okay, how can we help break this up? And we worked with leaders. We put out different resources and tools through our communication vehicles to encourage folks to disconnect, to encourage folks to take their vacation time. Now, they didn't really have a lot of opportunities on where to go and what to do, but people got very creative with that. And we said, look, we want you to take a break. This has been stressful for everyone. So let's make sure that we encourage all of our team members to do that and come back fresh and be able to bring that energy to help solve any challenges we had or our customers did. We tried to make sure we would encourage folks not to always have the camera on and always have the Teams meeting in video. Instead, break it up a little bit. We would encourage folks to do virtual coffee breaks. Make sure that for that period of time, you weren't talking about work. You were talking about other things and sharing other ideas and best practices. We had folks who would access whether it was meditation or other things that would help them just for a few minutes, but help them with that break. We encouraged things like, think about, are you facing the screen all the time? Well, what if you took a 1-minute break and just didn't even look at your screen and focused at something else before you came back to it or started your next meeting? So we tried to really tap into a lot of great ideas that came from our own team members and other folks we were networking with, and in some cases our customers, and said, let's try to figure out how we can help everyone disconnect a little bit and be fresh and fully engaged when we need them to be. We very much appreciated the dedication that our people have. It's absolutely incredible. And it chokes you up when you think of the lengths that some of our folks went to try and do everything they could to help their customers at that site, that location. But we also said, hey, we need to take care of you because we don't want you to be worn down or vulnerable should you get exposed. So let's try to do everything we can to help you be the best you can be too.
Yeah. And Donna, last night I sent you an email at 8 o'clock and there was a notification that told me I should send it to you during normal business hours. So I'm assuming you got it this morning. But listen, I want to thank our panelists today. I just have one collaboration. One of the challenges that we're facing when we don't have the opportunity to interface directly with folks in an office environment or campus environment is those social interactions that allow for great innovation, and oftentimes they're the water cooler moments. Are there things you're doing to kind of virtually create that water cooler moment so that you can influence not just within your own functional area, but the other areas that are dependent upon you or support you? So, Heather, can I start with you?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that we've done, but full disclosure, we've been back in the office since July.
That's true.
So we've been able to do quite a bit of collaboration, but leading up to coming back to the office, one of the things that we did as a group from a leadership perspective is we required our managers to have touch points with their group certain times during the day so that we knew that they were following up with them, they were having information. And then individual managers were allowed to do different things with their group online. Like with my human resources group and my IT group, they both wanted to have a happy hour. Mm-hmm. So we would do a virtual Friday happy hour where we would talk about things. We had different sessions too where we maybe wanted to brainstorm, and we would all pick a different background, and that was going to be our day to brainstorm at the beach or do whatever it was that you were going to do to kind of open up those creative channels. But you saw different groups doing different things. But what we found is that we found our managers reaching out more frequently and finding out more personal information about what was going on within their groups that allowed them to kind of create those connections. Surprisingly, we're a very competitive group, and so what we found was that people didn't want to leave their computers. They were finding that they were getting more done and were able to be more creative at home, whether it be with design, CFD, aerodynamics, what have you, that they were able to spend more time finding those finite details that helped us have that competitive edge. Mm-hmm. We got the championship this year, so we were doing something correct during this pandemic to make that happen. And even though they missed that daily interaction, they also acknowledged that having that quiet time at home without the interruptions of somebody always being in their office or on their phone allowed them to kind of find some of those gains that they've been looking for previously, and they wanted to share them. Yeah. And so when they started talking about the sharing of what they'd found or what they were able to complete and do, it was encouraging the others to do the same, but it was also encouraging the conversation about how they did it, what they found, and what they were doing and what the outcome was. So, some of it was accidental collaboration, for lack of a better phrase, but we were able to do that during it. And then coming back, we've seen that people have they've started scheduling their time and their calendars where they are not to be disturbed, so that they can maintain that ability to have that focus time where they're not being disrupted.
Okay. They're not sitting by the lake out there catching bass.
I'm not saying they're not doing that, but.
Catherine, how about from the Eagles standpoint?
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the big disadvantages of working from home was that loss of the informal, I think you said, water cooler talk and discussions and, interactions over a coffee or bumping into someone in the lunchroom. And it's interesting, when I first came to the Eagles, my first week at about noon, I looked around the office, I'm sitting in my office, and I thought, where is everyone? And then I realized that our Eagles cafeteria was the hub. And quite honestly, that's where consensus was built on decisions. Decisions were made, relationships built across departmental. And the one thing, and we haven't been in our office for approaching a year now, we've lost that big part of the Eagles culture. And so it's definitely hard to recreate that. Yeah. But I think there's ways that we've had touch points with our staff along the way. We hadn't seen our staff in about 6 months. And so as we kicked off the season, our executive team went down on the field at Lincoln Financial Field, and we had our staff with their families do a drive-through. And so they drove down onto the field, which our head of turf was not happy with us. But we actually had them drive onto the turf. Our president, myself, our executive team, we were greeting our staff. We had some goodies for them. We had our mascot and the cheerleaders, all with masks and socially distanced, but we provided them with a goodie bag, a special staff Go Birds hoodie for all the staff, and just we interacted. It was the first time I'd seen my staff in quite a while, and so that was just a really important touch point for us that went beyond Zoom. I think we're all zoomed out, and if I scheduled a virtual happy hour with my staff, there would be mutiny on the team, and I probably would get, I don't know if my staff would be very happy with me. And I think it's been a really good learning for leadership to know that this can work, and we have the technology in place to make it functional, and it's something that perhaps is here to stay, or that flexibility in the workforce, I think is a reality moving forward.
I agree with you. And I do think that balance that we're going to see in the future is going to be important. The right amount of social interaction to keep the culture going, especially with new hires, people coming into an organization new, can be very challenging, because they don't have that network built yet. But tenured people tend to know how to get things done because they've been in an organization for some time. So thank you very much. That's an interesting concept. Donna, there were some fun things you can implement for Ricoh.
There were.
No, I'm saying you can.
Oh, okay. Then we will.
But you did a lot. I mean, we did a lot to recognize employees, keep communication lines open, foster some virtual events to keep the employees engaged. Yeah,
that was probably one of the key things that we as an executive team, and frankly, all the leaders were concerned about, was the tight culture and connection that we have. And it's based around how we support our customers, but it's also tied to kind of Ricoh's identity about giving back to the community. And our employees were very concerned because they saw on the news every day that there were people who were out of work. There were food banks that didn't have enough food to give to people that needed it a great deal. And the one fabulous thing about technology and giving people an opportunity to be creative is the teams found a way to create virtual events where we could help, whether it was stocking food closets in different places, whether it was collecting at different locations and then delivering. But they found different ways to leverage an ability to still be connected as a Ricoh team and give back and support those that were being impacted so dramatically by the different waves of COVID changes that we were seeing go on. And so I think having an ability to encourage our employees to participate in those community events, even if they were virtual, it could be everything up to the virtual Christmas focus or holiday focus of being able to go online and help make sure different children were able to receive something over the holidays. I'd say the food banks were probably our number one area that we spent quite a bit of time and focus. That was one of the top things that employees voted. They wanted us to make sure we could try to help address the food needs that were going on for so many people. And to find a way to do that, even though we all weren't in the same office where we would typically collect things or we would go and donate and stock, and we had to find a different way to do it. That required creativity, but I do believe where there's a will, there's a way, and the team was amazing, came up with great ideas, and we were able to continue that focus. And I think that was a really good recognition for everyone to understand that if community is important to you, or the different aspects of who you are important to you, you can find a way, even during a pandemic. There's enough technology and enough creative people. And I think Catherine talked about creativity and innovation under these times. It was amazing, the ideas that came in for what people could do. So I would say, yes, we definitely found some great ways. And I think that helped people feel more like a community inside of Ricoh, even though we might not be able to see each other in the way we were used to every day.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. Drew, you shared with me some things that you did personally to try to, make sure you're not just collaborating within your own team, but also, across functions to make sure individuals that were worried about the university and the university sports program and how you were trying to help them understand some of the realities.
We, as an entire external team, and just understanding that Texas Athletics is over 300 employees and over 500 student athletes, and so they're divided up amongst various units and functions, and all of it. But we are one University of Texas Athletics program to the outside world, as well as all of our constituent groups. Catherine mentioned earlier, our outside ushers and gatemen and ticket takers, our partners in concessions that work for an outside company, our corporate partners that provide game day resources, but to a consumer, they're all University of Texas Athletics. We do a few things. The communication and transparency and just openness and authenticity is key in all these situations. Everyone's wondering what's going on. And so to try to work together and collaborate, from the top down, the early days when we were even discussing coming back to campus, what is this? We refer to them now as RTCs, the return to campus plans. We divided up into three really branches, and that was the first group that we've got to get back is our employees. We got to get our coaches back onto campus, our strength coaches back, our locker rooms open, our weight rooms open, things like that before our students even come back. And we involved all of the staff, in that. We basically divided up athletics into teams of employees getting back to campus, student athletes getting back to campus, headed up by Chris Blonsky, and then events. How do we get donors and fans and ticket holders and all of that back to campus? So this camaraderie that we're used to, at events and certainly in the office, it's a year-round endeavor for us. That's missed. That's deeply missed. And our ability to get together in the summer and at Christmas time over the holiday break and have these opportunities to really get together as a staff. I made sure, and we do something every Friday in the office where, we just call it the team huddle. And if you're part of the external groups, any of the units, you are open to come and attend, grab a donut, grab a cup of coffee. We're gonna casually visit for 15 to 30 minutes. There might be some business there. There might be some things that I inform the staff and make sure everybody's on the same page. But more so, what's going on? Birthdays to celebrate, anniversaries, births of children. The unfortunate occasional sad news of death of loved ones. How do we connect on a human level on a weekly basis? What I've actually found is during the pandemic, with the connectivity of video conferencing, there's much higher participation every Friday morning. People log in because it's just easier to hit that button and log in and see each other and turn your cameras on and have the conversation.
Great, thank you. Well, I really, truly appreciate all of our panelists today. This was a great dialogue. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I thought there was some very solid insights on how your organizations are adapting and thriving in spite of a very difficult time. Teamwork, whether it's on the sports field, to track, or in business, is critical for an organization's success. And key to that is a common language, a common vision, and a common set of tools so that we can communicate effectively. And it was great to hear the different approaches that you folks are taking to ensure that those teams stay united and importantly, that our employees stay engaged with the business. I mean, productivity is a measurement, but engagement is sometimes harder to track. So incredible dialogue. I really appreciate your efforts. We are proud of you as our partners. The cultures, the principles that you share, we share with you, and we're excited about our futures together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.